Hey everybody. Now today for our SQL lesson, we're going to talk about tables. Now, tables are pretty much the foundational object, if you will, for working in an SQL database. And it's going to be really important to understand them. There's some subtle differences between the tables you might know from something like Excel to the tables in SQL Server. So let's go ahead and look at what a table is, talk about it, and then see how to bring one into SQL Server. So I'm going to open up a sample file, SQL for Excel. And what I have here should look pretty familiar to most people. A table is just a bunch of data in columns and rows. And so the main difference is each row is another item, if you will, whereas each column is something about that item. It's descriptive. You have a row ID or an order date or a ship date, customer ID, customer name. Now, one of the things that you'll see is in some of these columns, there's different types of data. This is just text. This is a date. If I go all the way to the right, I have numbers. Now, Excel cares about that a little bit, but not really to a huge degree. SQL Server, you're going to see, and SQL in general, you really need to understand what type of data you're working with. So that's going to be one major difference, is we really have to tightly define what data we're working with. Another thing about tables is that you can't really have blanks in there. So if I insert something here, that's no good. This will be seen as two different tables. So let me go and delete those. And I don't need this column S right now either, so I'm going to delete that. But let's go ahead and get this ready to load into our SQL Server database. So I'm going to go up to File and Export. And I'm going to change the file type. Now I want to export that as a text or tab delimited. You can use CSV or other file formats too, but just the text tab delimited works best for me. So I'm going to click on that, do a save as. And I've got it in the directory I want. Now I'm going to call it SQL for Excel. That's fine. Click save. And it gives me a couple, Excel is telling me that it's, a text file can only save one tab of data. That's fine. So I'm done with that. I'm going to close Excel. And then we're going to open up SQL Server. Again, go here, SQL, and open that up. And it comes up, SQL Server is asking me to connect. So I connected, and now I want to bring that table in. So I can go ahead and expand my databases. Here's the one we made in a previous lesson, the NW or Northwind database. I'll expand that out, and we've got database diagrams, tables, views, all that other stuff. So the easiest way to add a table to our database is go ahead and right-click on the database and go to Tasks, and then Import Flat File. And I'll click Next here. And where's the location to be imported? I click Browse, comes right up here. I'm going to do my SQL for Excel.txt. Now, I want a new table name though, so I'm going to call that Northwind Orders. And the schema we're going to leave as the default, and just click Next. And now the wizard is going to preview the table, make some modifications possibly, and get ready to bring that into the database. One of the things in SQL Server, you can't have spaces in a column heading. You can in Excel. So anywhere there's spaces, it'll usually add that underscore character for you. Go ahead and click Next. And now here's what I'm talking about. SQL Server wants to assign a specific data type to every single column or field in your data. So right now it's going to do what Microsoft always does. It's going to take a guess as to what that data type is. Row ID, it's saying is a small int. Well, I know that we want to make that a text value. So I'm going to go ahead and make that nvarchar50. All right. So let's talk about that for a second. You see the nvarchar50 a lot in this import. What that is that's just SQL Server's data type for a string or text. It's variable number of characters. And then the number of characters, the max is 50 right now for all of these. So that's what nvarchar50 means. It's 50 character text string. So most of the text fields are going to be that. I happen to know a couple that need to be different though, like this one down here, product name. Instead of even 100, we're going to make that go to max. So we're going to pick nvarchar max. And then let's go down and look at our numeric data types. So there's a couple different data types that let you deal with decimal places. One's a float or a floating point number. The one we want to use is decimal. So I'm going to click that drop down and change all of my floating points to decimal 1810. And what that means is with our decimal number, we can have 18 digits to the left of the decimal and 10 to the right. Should be pretty good for our purposes. We go down to quantity, it's picked a tiny int. That's just a smaller version of an integer. I don't ever like to use those, so I'm going to click that and just change it to a regular integer. And then the others are going to be decimal 1810 as well. All right, and then the last thing we're going to do before we go next from this screen is we've got this column that says allow nulls. And as we bring in data, a database is very much more controlled about the data, how it comes in and goes out and how you work with it. So right now we're telling SQL Server, hey, don't allow nulls in any of these fields. We want to make sure that no bad data gets in. For our purposes today, we're going to allow nulls in every field. So I'll click that checkbox. The other thing we're going to do that we're not going to talk about a lot now, but we're going to make the row ID a primary key. And what that means is that's going to be the one thing that's unique on every single row. It'll never be different. And that's kind of how you manage and keep duplicates from happening. So we've got that all set up. Let's go ahead and click next. And we click finish. Let's hope everything loads in correctly. And it did. And sometimes you'll get error messages and they'll pop right here. And then you can just click on the error and go back and research what you need to fix. So go ahead and hit close. And let's look at this a little bit. So first thing we have to do, unfortunately, if we open our tables, it's not going to show up right away. I've got to actually refresh this database so that it will recognize that table we just pulled in. Now you see it here, DBO Northwind orders. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Now under here you can expand that and you have very highly detailed groupings where you can look at. You've got all your columns here. If I expand that, I can see what each column is and what it's defined as. Again, we're not going to work with this a ton right now. We're going to, as soon as we get this table in, we're going to start doing all the selections and the fun stuff. But I just want to show you that's here. And you see how we made that row ID a key? It's got a little key field there. That tells us that's the identifier for that row. Then there's some other things we'll get into again later in other SQL modules. But what we'd like to do now is actually see that data in that database or see that data in that table. So one of the quickest things to do, this is kind of like recording macros in Excel, is if I right click on a table, it's going to give me some options on what to do. And I've got all these things. We'll explore some of these. But right now, why don't we do this? We'll select the top 1,000 rows. Sounds good. Click that. Now, SQL Server is going to open up a new query window, build the query, and run it for you. It sounds like a lot. And don't worry, we're going to cover all that. But look what happened here. We've got to select top 1,000. And then it listed out every single field in our table. And then down here we have from Northwind orders. And that's how we opened up this whole table down here. Well, why don't we do something else? Let's do a simpler one. Let's just pick a couple fields and talk about these commands. So I'm going to just go down. I'm going to delete some of these rows. I'm going to get the customer name, ID. I'm not going to have any of this information. Maybe I'll do a category, subcategory, product name, and then just the sales. So delete all of these. So this looks a little bit better. Let's go ahead and run that. So anytime you have a query in SQL, you can go up here, click execute, and it will run that query. And now we've limited the number of columns we're looking at. So we're only looking at the ones we listed. Now this looks like a table down here, and it is, but it doesn't work like Excel. I can't just click and copy and paste things everywhere I want. But it shows you all the data in what we just did. So we've done a lot so far. We've looked at a table. We've seen how to import a table into SQL Server. And the next thing I want to just introduce before we get to the next lesson is probably the cornerstone or the most used command you're ever going to use. And that's the select statement, and it's right there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter a few times. And I'm going to just type one from scratch. So I'm going to say, I'm going to go ahead and delete these all from here. And I'm going to type the word select. What that's telling SQL to do is select columns we want to see. So now I can actually type the field names or the column headings if I want to see them. So let's go down here. We can look. We've still got row ID. So let's look at row ID. And then I'm going to hit enter. And then I'm going to hit a comma and do order ID. And then I'm going to do customer name. So I've selected 3 fields. And now, along with the select, you always have to have a from. And what from is, it's what table are we selecting from? So I'm going to do from. And our table was Northwind orders. So I'll do that. And then I've got, that's my query. Now I can go ahead and execute that. And it brought back just those 3 rows from Northwind orders. And it brought back all of the rows. So that's about all we're going to cover today. The next lesson, we're really going to dive into that select statement and see a lot of different ways we can work with it to get data and look at data from SQL Server.